Hello.
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 Evening.
Evening. So welcome to Season 2, Episode 11 of Inside the Rookery. Today, Rooks, myself, Andy Leask, I'm pointing the wrong way, Graham Davis, are joined by James Wallis, a good friend of the Rookery and all-round gaming legend. Welcome, James. We're really happy to have you back.
It's always absolutely a pleasure. Good Lord, there's echo in here. I apologise for that.
That's no problem. So today we're talking about storytelling with games. We have got a lot of questions pre-submitted, which I'll bring up as we go through. As always, people in the chat, please comment. I'll bring your comments up on screen. I'll bring up extra questions and we can have a really good conversation with James, which I know we will because we always do.
I'm flattered. I
pass
hope to live
over
up
to
to that.
Yeah, you can introduce yourself, James, as much or as little as you like, and then we'll get into the questions. I'll bring up the first one so you can have a read of it while you're chatting.
Fantastic. Hi, I'm James Wallis. I'm a games designer, publisher, a consultant, writer, writing abouter, all kinds of things. I've been kicking around games professionally almost as long as Graham, but not quite. Until in 1985 to Warlock magazine, if anyone remembers that, and then on to White Dwarf, and then on to writing stuff for the Americans, and then running Hogshead Publishing in the 90s, and a bunch of other stuff since. I'm best known for three things. First of all, I co-designed the card game Once Upon a Time, which has gone on to become a minor modern classic of storytelling in games. Secondly, I designed The Extraordinary Adventures of Baron Munchausen, or rather found the manuscript, the 2-century-old manuscript, lurking in my family papers, and published it. And then expanded in the third edition, I don't know if you've seen it, collaborated with a descendant of the Barons on creating new versions of it. And also, I sank your barge.
That should have been number one, but we'll let that go.
In this forum, perhaps. So you know, build up. You know, third place, second place.
Yeah, that's true. Keep people in suspense. So we'll jump straight into the first question, which comes from Kilishandra, a regular in the pre-submitted questions. We love a Kilishandra question. So, what games do you feel bring the best combinations of gameplay and narrative? I'll let James go first, and then the other rooks can dive in.
It's a huge question. I mean, when we say games, I'm not going to I'm not going to confine this to just role-playing games because I think that's over confining it. The history of narrative in games is extraordinary. There are a couple of very good academic books about it, both of which are in the sitting room, which is about 20 yards that way across a darkened garden. And I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll dig up the titles and Lindsay can post them on a blog, or we'll tweet about them later on or something. But they've tracked narrative games, narrative in the sense of almost role-playing, in the sense of you have a character, you narrate their adventures through confines, back 2 or 3 centuries to a game that was played in almost courtly circles across Europe, particularly Italy and France, and appeared to have had some longevity. Documentations, mentions of this game cropping up 70, 80 years apart. So clearly the game itself had longevity, even though it appears nobody has ever written down the rules. They only wrote in passing about having played the games, which is incredibly frustrating. Yeah. It's still, there are a couple of people doing PhDs on this kind of thing, and they have the time and the inclination to dig through musty archives, and thank God they do. It's fascinating. So there is something that inclines us to tell stories with games, to mix storytelling within games. It didn't start with Gygax and Arneson back in 74. I mean, we all know it predated that. I'm not going to tread on John Peterson's toes with his extraordinary book Playing at the World, which chronicles everything that led up to the invention of Dungeons and Dragons. If you haven't read it, it's mind-blowing. Not, again, partly for the depth of his research, but he talks a lot about Brownsteins, which are a forerunner of role-playing games in a kind of a war game idiom, and a lot of what turned into role-playing games came out of war games, not
Has everyone else lost James?
Am I back?
We lost.
You're back.
You're
yes.
back. We lost you just as you said. A lot of role-playing games came out of war games.
Came out of war games, not just mechanically, but narratively as well. Brownsteins started off as a way of simulating a small town under siege and turned into role-playing games very quickly. And again, the descriptions are fantastic. I am a games historian. I wrote a book for Dorling Kindersley on the history of games called Board Games in 100 Moves with one Ian Livingston, who you may be familiar with. I'm working on another one at the moment. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk. Sorry, we've signed the contract. I'm writing a book for Aconite Publishing, which is
Mark Gascoigne's new current venture.
I'm doing another non-fiction. Yeah. Our old mucker, Mark Gascoigne, who was, I think, publisher of the original Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay back in the day. So yes. So obviously that's ancient history, but it does mean that it is a massively wide field. There's an awful lot going on there, and a storytelling game won the Spiel des Jahres in the early '80s. The Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, the original version of that, and it's the old style of you are uncovering the story as you play, but it's blending game and gameplay. And what's been really interesting is the way that things have gone from being essentially a potted story, which is then told through the game. Usually either the game knows the story and you as the players uncover it, or the games master knows the story and the players uncover it, to this much more collaborative thing. And once upon a time it's not the only forerunner of it, but it's one of the forerunners of that, where you as the players are working together to create the story. And once upon a time it's explicitly about fairy tales, but there are other ways of doing that. And it really kicked off in a big way round about the year 2000. Baron Munchausen came out in 98 and was, so far as I know, the first of the commercially published small form factor, GM-less, single session, mechanics light, story heavy role-playing games or story games. We didn't call them story games back then because the term didn't exist. In the same way that the original Dungeons and Dragons claimed to be a miniatures war game on the cover. And game on there, nobody would have known what that meant. We put role-playing game on the front of Baron Munchausen because nobody would have known what we meant if we put story game.
Right.
So round about the year 2000, sparked by, I'm not going to say that I did not spark it off, though it was in the air. It was the zeitgeist. You had games like Unknown Armies coming out with Greg Stolze, who I do the Ludonarrative Dissidents podcast with. Unknown Armies was him and John Tynes, and previously Greg came out of the World of Darkness and working for that. Tynes had come out of Call of Cthulhu, and particularly the Pagan Publishing thing and Delta Green. But Unknown Armies is very much you work as the GM. You do not know.
No, I think we've lost you again.
James again.
Yeah.
I suspect my children have come in and are hammering the broadband. I apologize. I may disappear at moments. But Unknown Armies it's not the first, but it's one of the first. I'm not getting on to the point of what is the best. I don't know what the best is. The things that are really interesting at the moment, the games I've really enjoyed reading recently, Bluebeard's Bride is fantastic. It's bonkers. It's kind of I don't know really how to describe it. It's again, you're working as a group of players, but there's only one character. You're all playing aspects of the same character, who is the wife of Bluebeard, the notorious murderer of brides. And it's a single session game, though you can play it repeatedly with different brides each time. And it's about being a woman, if that makes any sense, in a very kind of metaphysical way. It's about the horrors that women face, and it is a horror game, very much. It is an extraordinary piece of work, the stories that it creates are not like anything else I've encountered, either in games or in regular fiction. It's completely its own thing. I think Avery Alder's A Quiet Year is absolutely beautiful. I think 1,000-Year-Old Vampire, if it works for you, if you're into vampire narratives, 1,000-Year-Old Vampire is fantastic. It's an epistolary, no, not right. a chronicle of your character's thing, following rules and precepts and prompts that you get out of the book. And will your character survive 1,000 years or not? Weird stuff is going to happen to them along the way. I bounced off it because I realized playing it that actually I'm not interested in vampires as protagonists. I'm kind of, I don't know if I'm past that or just never was into it in the first place. But being a vampire is, I bounced off Vampire the Masquerade. I can respect it. I think what it does brilliantly, but it's not for me. So that's kind of what I've been looking at the moment. Oh, and Wander Home as well, which is just glorious, which is this beautiful pastoral game of GM-less. You're working together to create the tale of being a band of wandering animals in that kind of humanoid animals kind of way. Whether you're looking for something or whether you're moving away from something or just moving through a landscape as the seasons change, it's exquisite. Jay Dragon, I think, is one of the most interesting designers working in roleplay at the moment. I do realize that I'm talking quite possibly to an audience of people who have grown up on Warhammer Fantasy roleplay and are looking for the grimdark. Wander Home is not that game, but it is in the way that it builds narrative through gameplay and narrative through mechanics and narrative through structure. It's really, really lovely. And it's just a beautiful game to read. I described it recently. It's a game that holds your hand in every sense of the phrase. Not just in explaining how to play a GM-less role-playing game, but it's warm and kind and It's...
I'm struck. I remember there was The Animals of Farthing Wood. You know that series of books.
Very much that kind of thing. It's more. They're not animals, they're anthropomorphic animals, so they wear clothes and they have trades and stuff like that. But yes,
or Narnia.
Very much.
Or Wind in the Willows.
Wind in the Willows is the British one. What's the American one that I can never remember? There's a series of books that was big about 15, 20 years ago.
Red Wall?
Red Wall, yes. And then Mouse Guard, of course.
Yes.
And the movie that was never made, and it's such a shame. You can find the early visualizations and some of the 3D renders for the movie that was never made up on the net, and it's just one of those projects you look at and go, oh, if only. It's like the Jodorowsky Dune. You go, oh, please, let me jump to a time.
Right, a timeline where that happened. Yes.
Okay, I've talked for about 10 minutes with intervals. Please, would you take over?
Can we just go right back to the start, to the old game in Italy? I was chortling the whole time thinking Machiavelli's The Prince was actually just a source book for that game. It was like Dirty Secrets of the Black Hand for the Sabbat, but just for that game.
Lovely.
That's now my Machiavelli canon.
Yeah. No, I mean, the weird thing about this one is it is kind of heroic fantasy. It's if you can give me 30 seconds, I'll run into the house and get it and come back. Yeah, someone else talk about games. I will be back in 30 seconds. No, I can't remember.
Right.
Bye, James. It's glorious chaos when James comes on his show.
It is, but we love it.
Certainly is. Always entertaining and very well informed.
I'll go back to the other questions, so the previous ones, so you can both give your answer.
Best combinations of gameplay and narrative. Well, I can't even pretend to compete with James's depth and breadth of knowledge, but in my own experience, Call of Cthulhu was the first thing that did that for me. That there was actually a story. You weren't just kill, loot, repeat. Robin Laws in Pelgrane did a nice sort of take on that with the Cthulhu Confidential, which was much more, single protagonist, a lot of social commentary in there, as well as a pretty good story. And I think anything Robin does is worth looking at. And here's James. So
I'm back. Here is the book. The book is Storytelling in the Modern Board Game by Marco Arnaudo.
Right.
And I'm not out of breath now. Which makes it sound like my garden is enormous. I wish. I live in South London. Give me a second. Let me just find this.
What about you, Andy?
Well, for me, I mean, there's a few. I mean, I've spoken before about Conspiracy X. I've spoken a lot about Conspiracy X, and the way in which the psychic powers used Xener cards instead of dice. So if you were actually psychic, you were better at it, and I quite like that. But to take it out of role-playing game sort of arena, there's the game Mysterium, which is a lovely game, which was a birthday present to me from Andy and Lindsay Law, which is nice because it's a little bit like Dixit, which I also love. But the idea is that everybody's there as as a mediums, and one player is playing the ghost, who's trying to kind of send messages to the mediums through these cards that are a bit like the Dixit cards. And you've got to try and indicate, kind of like, where you were murdered and what the weapon was and all that kind of stuff. And it's got very nice mechanics that basically takes Dixit, which is a lovely sort of open storytelling thing, but applies it to this. And we played it unhelpfully in the dark with candles, which is very atmospheric, but it made actually looking at the cards really, really tough. But it was a lot of fun. And we even added our own twist to it when we had the Law's daughter was like a sub-spirit who was also running around and giving extra tips and things.
And Laurie, I think that was Laurie, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
And she does have a unique way of viewing the world. And I just thought that brought an extra weirdness to the ghost. I once found a book, a children's miscellany, if you know those miscellanies you get every year. It was a children's one, and it had types like ghosts in it, things about ghosts. And I found a note in the book that said, "We think there's a ghost in the girls' bathroom at school. These are the list of ghosts that we have made that it could be." And it was like a poltergeist. But then there was nurse ghost, strongest possibility.
Nice.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Lovely. Yeah.
Someone's mentioned Blades in the Dark. Blades in the Dark, yes, terrific. Yeah. I have my one-upmanship on Mysterium, which is have you played the original Ukrainian edition, because it's better?
Oh, really?
It's originally a Ukrainian game. The art is different and slightly darker and a little bit more realistic, and the rules are simpler and more streamlined.
Interesting.
I think it's a better game, but then I own it, so I use it to do the one-upmanship thing on it. But it's it's a company called iGames or iHeart Games, but of course you can't type a heart easily and therefore can't Google it, so they're just known as iGames. Yes, but fantastic. So this is the book, Storytelling in the Modern Board Game. It's literally page 6 and 7 talk about this this game. Castiglione talks about it in the Book of the Courtier, 1528. The game being, let me read this. If one was around the same courts in the 16th century, one could also play other games that involved creating narratives and playing a role. In one of these activities, the players would pretend to be wizards and would describe the palaces they could create with their spells. In another, a participant would pretend to be Charon, while the other players would be souls of dead lovers and would explain to him how they met their fates. And then it goes on, and then there's apparently a board game version called Ariosto's Maze, where you, as you progress along the board, you narrate your adventures as you go. And, this is more than 500 years ago.
Yeah.
Extraordinary stuff. I recommend. It's a very, despite that it's the fact that it's clearly come out of someone's academic research, it's very readable and very well written. It's a very good book.
Very nice.
I do feel like talking animals in British children's literature could be a stream in and of itself. I heard some pretty scathing literary criticism about that, and how in Britain we talk about really serious things through the method of animals, and it's okay if it's animals. Anyway, we'll do that on another stream. I think that's a fascinating topic.
I'm literally teaching Animal Farm right now, which is exactly that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
The reason I brought up Animals of Farthing Wood was because, James, when you said that it's not as grim dark, the one that you were talking about, I remembered Animals of Farthing Wood at one point in that, when the animals are like going through wherever they're going to get to the blessed place of Farthing Wood, they meet a shrike, a bird, and the shrike has, as they do, taken all of the babies, but they're the babies of like an actual character in the book, and has impaled them on the thorns, because that's what they do. And it is actually like one of the most horrific bits in a children's book I have ever read. And I did read it when I was about 9 or 10, and it deeply scarred me. I don't know if they put that in the BBC cartoon adaptation. I'll need to check.
I have no idea. Well, I'm told the recent Watership Down is apparently true to the book, which is to say horrible, because it's a horrible book in the good sense of horrible. There's the number of kids have been scarred by Watership Down.
I've never seen Watership Down, but Andy Law just like sometimes sings the, like Bright Eyes Burning Like Fire, and I just cry. So if he ever wants to make me cry, that's what he sings. He doesn't know I'm joking. He never wants to make me cry.
I've not heard Andy sing, but I can imagine.
Yes.
Anyway,
Seagoat's question has been up for a while. We should
it has,
do
yes.
something
So
about
Seagoat asks, when storytelling, do you A, let the characters' actions and comments drive the story, B, have the character roles drive the story, or stick to the plot adventure you have planned and describe responses to players to conform to the adventure? So this is quite an RPG, tabletop RPG focus question.
Yeah.
That's fine. I suspect that's the crowd. That's who we're talking to. Me first, or you risk getting another 15 minutes of me just going off and then running into the house to retrieve a rule book. It depends. It depends on the game. There are pluses and there are minuses to both approaches. I think it depends on the sort of story you want to tell. If you have a story that you want to tell, and occasionally I do. My last published role-playing game, Las Vegas, is very much, it's a story. It's a self-contained story in 4 episodes, modeled on an HBO miniseries. It's not a railroad. You can go off track if you want to. You can decide that rather than progressing into the final act and bringing everything to an end, this is actually an environment where you'd rather stay and set up business and live out your existence. And that's fine, and the book accommodates that. But it's basically, here is a sequence of things written out in the same style as, it's not a movie script, but here are the encounters, and this encounter leads on to this encounter, and this encounter leads on to this encounter. And it's fine for that particular game. But at the same time, I split out the rules from it. It's an amnesia narrative. You start the game with no memories. You don't remember who you are, and you don't remember what you can do, which means that your character sheet at the start is literally blank. You don't even have a name on it, because you start off. Character generation is, you describe what you look like, and then other people tell you stuff that you've forgotten. Like, that big tattoo on your back of a slaughtered lamb, what's that about? Oh, crap. Yes, those interesting burn marks, the piercings. It's character generation can get really interesting. But the way the system works in that is, to gain a skill, you have a flashback and you remember it in using it in your old life, and you have to describe that. And obviously those memories kind of start to patch work together, and then other people can give you memories, and the GM can give you memories, and you have to start having memories of the other characters as well. There's only so much of that you can do. You couldn't do an open-ended campaign of that, or your character, you can write the character Bible of all this stuff. Once you've discovered who you were, what you did, how you all got to what you were doing together, and how you ended up where you were at the start of the game, because at the start of the game, this is not a big spoiler, you are naked, you dig yourselves out of the shallow grave in which you have been dumped in the desert as a group, and none of you remember who you are. Once you've discovered that, at that point, okay, now we're into the end section of the game, and everything kind of kicks off. So it depends on the game. There are some games where I enjoy being told a well-crafted story. There are some where I enjoy coming up with a story with a group of friends. And I think something like Blades in the Dark, which was mentioned, is very much an exploratory game where you create the story, you create the narrative, the mistakes are yours to make. Because that's the structure of what the game is. It's essentially setting up a gang and running a gang in a fantasy city. It's Peaky Blinders in Greyhawk, or whichever skeezy city. Actually, it's more of a as written. It's kind of a steampunky city. It is lovely. It's brilliantly done, brilliantly written. So. I think that one does. I'm scraping my memory, trying to think of other ones that kind of compromise. But it does tend to be the more modern thing, the idea of letting the players dictate the way the story goes, rather than the GM having it all plotted, or indeed buying a module that tells them exactly what's going to happen. Right.
Yeah, I'm now going to steal everything about a Las Vegas and use it as a character generation system for a campaign.
By all means, the rules are it's released under Creative Commons. It's called the Fugue system.
Oh,
I will send you a link.
That would be great. Thanks. Lacking James's breadth of experience and being mainly a role-playing specialist, I would answer Seagoat's question with yes, yes, and yes, because it depends on, as James said, it depends very much on the game. And I also think it depends very much on the circumstances in the moment. So yes, stick to the plot you have planned, at least in as far as getting the broad arc of the campaign out, or to put it another way, doing nothing that would compromise enjoyment down the line. But if character roles give you something really interesting, a little interesting side track, or a situation that is going to be fun to play, do that. If character suggestions and words give you something really interesting, go with that. So that's probably a very unhelpful answer. But
I think what can sometimes help as well, because we've spoken before, we did a stream specifically about like railroading versus sandboxing and sort of pros and cons of different strategies. And I think our general consensus was, a bit of both. But like what I think can sometimes happen as players, you sometimes can accept outcomes that have arisen naturally through roles and organic decisions and discussions more than you would if they were imposed on them. I've got a very specific example from Ashes of Middenheim from second edition Wifrit. Now, this is not a plot spoiler if anybody's playing that decades-old campaign, but just in case. But at the end, you're fighting the big bad. Hopefully that's not a spoiler, that you fight somebody at the end. And we were playing against that. My character, he spent his last fate point in a big fight with him, died to critical wounds and lost arm, and was in the situation where he had to test to die like every round. Still in the fight, spraying blood out of the stump, hacking away at the bad guy. The next round, I, still up, killed the bad guy and rolled exactly the same critical and cut his arm off. He died, and then the next round, my character sank to his knees and died. Now, if that had been imposed on us, we'd have been like, that's cheesy, what are the odds against that? But we legitimately rolled those rolls, and it made for this very epic moment that I think we just wouldn't have accepted if it had been top down. So.
True. Yeah.
That's true, actually.
Sorry. I was just going to say, similarly in Las Vegas, it's building to one core moment, one key moment, which it was. I had the start of the game, I had the end of the game, and everything else was kind of filling in. The thing that took the time writing it was filling in the bits in the middle, which is why it was a massively overdue Kickstarter, for which I massively apologise to anyone who may have backed it in this chat. Did deliver, finally, did actually come out. It's. I think if you've got a scripted narrative, if there is a particular story that you want to tell or that the players want to be told, then yes. I would never advocate railroading as such. Railroading implies an absence of choice. The players should always have the choice. They should always have the option. But a skilled narrative designer will be able to structure the story in such a way that the players want to go in a particular direction.
Yeah. It's all about maintaining at least the impression of agency.
Yes.
Yeah. There's Seagoats raging in the chat, Graham.
Is he now?
Oh, yeah. Listen to this. Why was it? Graham answered, yes. I ask questions to make you think and to raise a discussion, Graham. And he continues with his chastisement. There may not be an answer to my questions, but it is a discussion that is important. Thank you, Seagoat. You keep us honest in this chat.
Well, I hope in answering yes, and yes, I didn't come across as merely evasive, but actually had
like
reasons
a politician.
For why each one was. Yeah, exactly. Yes and no, Minister.
Right, let me have a look and see. This is a dangerous question because it's not a question. This is less of a
Ooh.
sorry. I always get Susan Henny Yukimi asking. This is less of a question and more of an open invitation to talk FRUP. Do you think James needs an open invitation to just talk? Ooh.
Possibly.
Could be tricky.
I blow hot and cold on FRUP. FRUP, for those who don't know, is the role-playing game that Hogshead never published. There were a number of role-playing games we didn't publish. We didn't publish Bugtown because we lost the rights to it to Eric Wujik, who I believe promised the license holder that he would publish the Bugtown role-playing game with having no intention of doing so. He wanted to take the rights away from us. FRUP was going to be Hogshead's release after WooFRUP. And it is a fantasy parody. So specifically, it's a Dungeons and Dragons parody. It's set in a world where 1,000 years ago, 3 great books, each as thick as a man stands tall, fell from the skies and were discovered by a band of itinerant and belligerent monks who spent 100 years decoding them and realized that they describe an ideal world, a perfect society, because everybody knows their place, because everyone knows everyone else's place, because everyone has a class and attributes and a level, because they are the D&D rule books. So fast forward 900 years, you have a society that is modeled explicitly around the rules of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. And this was 1995, so AD&D 2 existed. Yes, AD&D 2 existed, but 3rd edition was still a long way away. And you know, and it's basically a completely messed up society. And of course, the Society of Monks has now become the equivalent of the Catholic Church in medieval times. Its word is literally law. This is a game in which you can play both a rules lawyer and a wandering minister, who are the only people who are allowed to read the Book of Rules, which is the Dungeon Master's Guide, and you know, and can have people burnt at the stake. If you break the rules, you're a heretic, and you will be burnt at the stake. And of course, there's an entire society of people who have either rejected the rules entirely and gone, no, this is ridiculous, or more likely have created a better set of rules using percentile-based skill systems and are out preaching the doctrine of those. And I'd written most of this, and then for various reasons, Hogshead never published it because stuff happened. We got screwed by a major distributor who essentially tried very hard to put us out of business so they could buy our bankrupt stock. And at that point I had to, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, but I had to drop all my plans for other role-playing games and just focus on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay to pay off our overdraft. And to, you know, to get the company back on an even financial keel. I had to make everyone redundant, including myself. I worked without pay then for about 1.5 years until we finally had enough money to bring in Matthew Pook, for those who know Pookie. Still a stalwart of the British role-playing scene. Still, his reviews from, how do you pronounce the place where Cthulhu is sleeping?
I always go Relie, but...
Yeah, I have something sort of Relia or something like that. Anyway, reviews from that word. Really good, on point RPG reviews. But anyway, but by the time we got to that stage, FRUP had been had stopped fermenting and started rotting in my head. But at the same time, now we've had 3rd edition and 4th edition, 5th edition. Yeah, I think its time may have re-emerged. And I've read the old manuscript. The core concept is still solid. Most of the old writing, because it was based on jokes, not just about AD&D and 2nd edition AD&D, but also about the 90s and the role-playing scene in the 90s. You know, we were going to do a role-playing supplement, a double-sided role-playing supplement that was a parody of Vampire the Masquerade and Magic the Gathering. It's like, how mid-90s could you possibly be?
Very.
Yes. It was going to Black Locust and Bite Me is what it was going to be called. And we were going to do the green marble thing with a dropped ice cream on it. Yeah, it was, we were having fun. I still have, and I believe I still have the rights to all the art that we commissioned from it.
Lee Brimmick and Wood.
Lee Brimmick and Wood, who's fantastic art, Lee's now a senior designer at I'm blanking on the name, one of the big software companies down in Guildford, games companies. I ran into him at a War Games conference before lockdown. And a fantastic woodcut artist whose name I'm blanking on, and your friend of mine, Ralph Horsley, stalwart of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, some of his early work. And Ralph's work has never been rough, but it was less polished. Let's put it this way, less polished than it is today.
And Ralph has gone on to illustrate huge numbers of cards in Magic the Gathering, hasn't he?
He has, yeah. I mean, he's now and D&D books as well. He's you know, it's fantastic. I'm so happy for him.
We had Ralph on the show and talking about his Patreon and various other, and a bit of a retrospective on his Wifrip art. So if the Magic Comments Andy could find that link in Ralph's Patreon, that would be really nice.
Yeah.
Thanks, Magic Comments Andy.
I'm just thinking now about all the fun you could have with the concepts of open gaming licenses and community content within the context of FRUP.
Yes.
That would be...
I think the thing is, yeah, I mean, because it would fall into the kind of the heretical sects and all the rest of it, because I don't think any of that stuff is mentioned in the books themselves.
Right.
And the idea is that, you know, players go, well, we'd like a copy of these magical tomes that our characters are supposed to have access to. And it's like, okay, well, just take the player's handbook that you're bound to have a copy of lying around somewhere, and then write it out by hand and pass that to someone else and have them write that out by hand. And then do that for 900 years. Yeah. That's your player's handbook.
Nice.
Because the printing press is technology, and that's heretical and will be firebombed by mages on flying carpets. Carpet bombing. That was the joke.
That was the
joke. It came out of the first Iraq War. Carpet bombing. Yes. You say some of the jokes still work. Some of them really don't.
They do. Yeah. I could see open gaming licenses as almost like the selling of indulgences. Yes, the whatever you want to do. But I mean the big thing obviously is that you have to carry around a character sheet. If you don't have a character sheet, you're a non-player character or possibly even a monster and can be killed for the experience points. But what it says on your character sheet that you can do and what you can actually do probably do not overlap at all, particularly if you're a magic user, because the magic system described in the D&D rulebook is not the way that magic works in this world at all. So so that's basically it. So it's one of those, it's a consensus reality game, it's a fantasy paranoia essentially. Paranoia, one of my great inspirations for game design generally. And I was lead designer on the Mongoose edition. No, there have been several Mongoose editions. The most recent Mongoose edition, the reboot of Paranoia, which was oh god, that was fun. Working with Grant Howitt, who you may know from Spire and Goblin Quest, and more likely Honey Heist, which is the thing of his that seems to have gone viral, the one-page game in which you play a bunch of bears robbing somewhere of honey. Grant is a lunatic, madman, genius designer. He's out there in the wilderness waving the banner for, I don't know what his school of design is called, but sometimes I get the yen to go and follow him. And Paul Dean, who was let me just credit Paul, who was part of the original Shut Up and Sit Down crew and is now doing excellent game design work in his own right.
I was just going to say, I think my brother would like the bear game because he once told me that I should eat more smoked salmon because bears ate salmon, and who doesn't like a bear? So
there you are.
His logic is unassailable.
His logic is unassailable. Always has been. Always will be. So Bastian has asked, "Hi James, off topic currently, but did you ever find the files for your version of the Empire in Chaos?"
Oh, the kind of the rough notes I had for it. I have talked about them somewhere in the past. The trouble, or part of the trouble, is that we're 20 years past the close of Hogshead. The old CDRs that I backed up all the Hogshead files onto have decayed. They are not readable anymore. They weren't readable I think I went to them about 5 years after the company closed looking for something, and half of them simply couldn't be read. So there is a description out there on the net somewhere of most of the things that would have been in there. And off the top of my head, I can't remember. It's not a million miles away from the other people who have tried to rewrite it. There are certain elements. You follow the enemy within through. There are certain themes that have to come up in the last part. It has to be the big climax. And I'll try and find a link for wherever it's got to. I can't remember. I did an interview. I wrote something up for somebody covering what was going to be in it. I'll see if I can
for
find it.
Gideon's Awesome Lies blog. Was it for that?
That's why someone's put that in the chat. I
think
couldn't...
someone's put it there. I've had no contact with Gideon, unfortunately. I follow the blog. I think it's an amazing piece of research.
It certainly is, yeah.
But I've had no direct contact with him. But I think he may well have posted it at some point.
Yeah. Either that, or I'm thinking possibly Realm of Chaos 80s, which I think is now dormant.
Whenever anyone says Realm of Chaos, I want to sing that song from that metal album that Games Workshop put out. I'm not going to... If Andy Law was here, he would sing it.
Mm-hmm.
If he's watching, I could probably hear him sing it in the other room. Like, enter the realms of chaos. Your nightmare has just begun. But he sings it properly. I have more self-respect.
I'm amazed he can remember.
There we go.
Did you hear that? Yeah.
We did.
Excellent. On demand. There we go. Seagoat, the cheeky scamp, asks, does James just hate barges, or are the associated careers, bargemen, etc., also within his purview?
I don't hate barges at all. I just hate one barge in particular. Your barge.
That's right. Yeah, the barge that keeps you from getting on with the bloody campaign.
Yeah, the number of people I have talked to before and since who just get, we just got into the river trading thing. It's like, that's not grim and dark. That's not, that's not the chaos. That's not, occasional river pirates. It's not the kind of threat that you should be facing in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. That's a literal.
Although getting obsessed with profits and capitalism as the world burns around you, in a way, is pretty grimdark.
Yeah,
that's very nicely put. Yes,
thank you. I try. Right, let us go back to another question from Kilishandra. What single rule system have you encountered that you felt really reinforced the story the game was telling? Just while you're thinking,
I think
the bolt thrower song, exactly.
Yes,
exactly the one.
Whose sound the late lamented Mike Brunton once compared to a dyspeptic hippo in a cement mixer factory.
See, I'm popular with Seagoat tonight, Graham. Check it out.
Oh yeah,
that's a good way of putting it.
Well, narrative-wise, I always, and I'm sorry for everybody who's heard me say this 6 times already, go back to the humanity mechanic in Vampire, because that underpins the story. It gives you some stakes. Sorry, I did not intend that pun. I'll get my coat. That really blew my mind when I first read the first edition. The notes from Mark Reinhagen when I saw that mechanic, because there's so much stories there. It articulates story. It tells a story. It tells you what the theme of the game is, the storytelling game of personal horror. It just crystallizes everything so nicely. So that's always my vote.
The question is really, are we talking about mechanics, or are we talking about structure? Are we talking about the overall shape of the game? Or are we talking about one kind of particular thing? I think, on a similar note to what Greg was saying about humanity, various people have talked about the sanity mechanic in Call of Cthulhu, which was brilliant in the early 80s, but is a massive, massive oversimplification and is kind of a sledgehammer. Last, I'm going to plug Ludonarrative Dissidents again. Dissidents, not dissonance. The podcast I did with Greg Solsey and Ross Payton. We were actually we kickstarted it, and one of the stretch goals was that the last 3 episodes, we would look at each other's games. And last night, which is why it's fresh in my mind, we looked at Unknown Armies. And the way that Unknown Armies is explicitly a game about how much of yourself, how much of your self-worth and your self-image are you prepared to sacrifice to achieve your goals, to achieve fixing what you think is wrong with the world. Greg describes it as being a game in which broken people try to fix the world.
Nice.
And that takes the humanity sanity mechanic, the sanity series of things, and essentially models how you are prepared to take that damage and how you are prepared to sacrifice parts of yourself. And it's a horror game. It is a horror game. It comes over, you read the back cover text, and it's kind of, oh, this is a bright, sparky game in which there's all these types of magic. There's sex magic, and there's office bureaucracy magic, and you can basically make up a school of magic about pretty much anything. It's really smart. It's a really smart piece of design. But that is very clever. You were talking about the gumshoe mechanic, I think, at one point, which is incredibly smart. Brilliant. Robin... The work that Robin Laws and Ken Hyatt are doing for Pelgrane Press is absolutely gorgeous.
It is.
In terms of pushing just the understanding of how to model narrative forms within interactive fiction. Superb. And that gumshoe mechanic on detecting stuff, I'm about to rip off wholesale for a project that I may have mentioned before. I want to do, essentially, it's a sub D&D game. It's set in the D&D worlds or something very similar to it, but you're not playing heroic characters at all. You are in fact playing teen detectives, outcasts, solving little mysteries and stuff like that. The working title is Nancy Drow. You may grow.
Oh,
ouch!
Well done.
Thank you. It works. And it was one of the title came first, and everything followed from there. But it will use the gumshoe mechanics plastered onto the D&D 5 mechanics in a very obvious kind of way. So there's that. There's another game that I was going to mention that I've been thinking about recently. This is another one that I published. This was the last of the new style games, which was the little one that did of the thin ones. This is a Polish game originally, De Profundis. It's an epistolatory game set in the worlds of the Cthulhu mythos, kind of, in which you write letters to each other. There's no GM-less. You write letters back and forth, talking of basically, I have discovered this thing, these group of people, and I believe, and you write it to someone else who is participating in the group fiction, and they write back going, that's extraordinary, that overlaps with my research into such and such, and I feel they're building to something at the end, and you go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, building up until finally you write a letter that goes, tonight is the night I go to their warehouse and I confront them, and then you never write another letter. But it's brilliantly done. It's on one level funny, on another it's perfectly in tune with Lovecraft's original stories and the tone of the mythos. Structurally, it's absolutely brilliant. And the entire game is written as a series of letters from the game designer to an unknown reader who is you, and builds up to this climax. And then the last letter is missing. The entire game is its own example of play. It's a masterpiece of design. It's a masterpiece of setting the tone, which is one of the things that Munchausen does as well. The Munchausen rules are only about half a page of A4. It's very, very short. The Fantasy Flight edition is, I think, 144 pages. It's because you can't sell half a page of rules.
No.
The Hogshead edition was 24 pages, and the way I padded it, and let's be honest, me rather than the Baron actually writing it. Expect a man in a tricorn hat to burst through the door at any moment and wag his finger at the screen. Yeah. It's basically because it's the Baron explaining how to play his games, and the Baron is very long-winded and a natural storyteller, so he digresses a lot. But this is, again, the point of that is to show you the sort of stories you should be telling, the sort of interruptions you should be coming along the way, and the tone of the whole thing. And if it wasn't there, the game would not work nearly so well.
Right.
And I think De Profundis, which I think is still in print, I think the PDF is still out there. I think so. Either Modiphius or Cubicle 7 did it. Couldn't tell you, but second or third edition. It is just superb. It's a really excellent game. It reinforces the game. The game tells you exactly what you should be doing without constraining you, without saying just follow these templates. It's really lovely.
Yeah, I would second that. It was, I think, my second favorite after the Baron of all the new style games.
Yeah, I mean, I'm enormously fond of all of them, but in terms of pushing the envelope on, which was always what I wanted to do with Hogshead, Hogshead was meant to follow the David Fincher thing, essentially, of do one product that's massively bankable and earns the money that we can then risk on the next thing, which is risky. We didn't do nearly enough of the risky stuff because economics worked out that way.
Right.
But Frop was going to be a risky, and then Slay Industries came along, and that was bankable. And then a new style. They didn't make much money, to be honest. None of them lost much money. But they're small format stuff. They were cheap to do.
Right.
But if you were trying to run a professional company with employees, which I was, then they were a massive time sink for very little reward financially. In terms of reputation, they did the company the world of good.
Oh, absolutely.
And Munchausen is still in print. Currently out of print. Well, currently available as a PDF. But I think Monday possibly going to sign something that will bring it back into print. So. I'm very happy.
You heard it here first.
You did.
Andy, you're not terribly lucky with dice mechanics, are you?
No. Although
actually, more recently it's been fine, but historically, no.
Yeah. So, do you have a favorite kind of rules device alternative? Like you did mention the one with the
Xener cards.
If you're actually psychic,
yeah, which I'm not. It turns out.
No, me because I am.
Interesting thought about this though. It is the inverse of that. The lack of a mechanic that helps contribute to the story it's telling. So, like, I'm a big fan of, like, first edition Stormbringer, where it went out of its way to make the magic system consistent with what's in the Elric books, which is not hurling fireballs around like in Dungeons and Dragons, but it's specifically summoning up elementals and demons and bargaining with them or binding them and getting them to do tasks and do things. And in subsequent editions and like Elric and something, like, it became a little bit more, that became diluted a little bit to make it a little bit more like a normal fantasy RPG. But I really missed that, and it was interesting. I went back and played it. Having played Elric in later games, went back and played first edition, and it was much closer in tone to what you had in Moorcock because of it. So I think that's interesting, the way that sometimes including a mechanic can almost make it harder to tell the type of story you want to tell.
Yeah, well, this is another thing I bang on about endlessly, along with the vampire humanity mechanic, is the magic system in a little game called Maelstrom, which was published by Puffin in the mid-'80s. And essentially, it's Elizabethan England with fantasy elements. But the magic system there blew my mind. Other people were seriously disappointed with it. But it's a magic system with no spells and almost no mechanics. And when a magic-using character wants to use magic, they roll basically a knowledge check to see if they know anything that will help. And then presumably they and or the GM describe the effect that they've created. And it's like Andy said, it's almost has that Taoist doing by not doing kind of attitude. And, it fosters such imagination. For example, taking out an enemy's armor by unpicking the stitching. Because you happen to know a little sewing enchantment, that sort of thing.
It's lovely. It as I recall, and I'm actually thanked in the forward to it because Alex Scott the author, and I were at school together. He was 17 when he wrote that.
I remember he was very young. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a professor of maths at Oxford now, and still a lovely, lovely human being. It's about how far you're pushing reality, essentially, how much you are changing reality. So if you can do the big effects if you want to, but it takes a lot of energy and a lot of preparation. Right. The little effects are, you can be quite subtle and quite fun. It's really smart. I still am enormously fond of Maelstrom. That article I mentioned for Warlock was a monster system for Maelstrom because it has no monsters as published.
I'll have to run away to my PDFs and look that up. I don't remember that in Warlock.
Warlock 6, I think. 5 or 6.
Mage the Ascension had some of that about it too. It wasn't really very structured in what you could do. You had to come up with that, and it was your paradigm and who was watching, etc. I can't, like, I played that so long ago, it's back in the mist of times, but I always remember it was a very different experience than other World of Darkness games, I always felt. Maybe that's just the way we played it. Andy has booked up. What have we got in Maelstrom in the comments?
Yes, it's still in print. I can't remember is it Aeon printing it these days?
I don't know.
I think they've tweaked it. Yeah.
Yes,
and someone mentions the Ars Magica system. I love Ars Magica. It's one of my very best role-playing campaigns ever was in Ars Magica. And yes, they go back to the Latin, and they give you a range of verbs and range of nouns, and you can either research your spells in advance or try and create something on the fly, and it's great. It feels magical in a way that D&D spell lists really don't.
I wonder if J.K. Rowling ever played it. And
I was just thinking that.
Cod Latin spell incantation.
I was just thinking that.
No, I don't think she ever did, and I'm fairly conclusive about this because this is a story that must be well out of NDA. I can't remember who it was, and if I could remember, I wouldn't tell you. But I was talking 20 years ago to somebody who was in the Wizards of the Coast pitch meeting to J.K. Rowling for the Harry Potter CCG and the Harry Potter role-playing game.
Right.
And they described the CCG to her, and she goes, "Oh, this is fantastic! Cards for everyone, and cards. This is fantastic. This encapsulates everything I was about. This is wonderful. People will get to play that." And they went, "Oh, well, fantastic! Because if you love that, you're going to love this. This is a role-playing game." And she's go, "What's that?" Well, we give you all the background and all the characters, and you create your own characters and tell your own stories. And she was like, "No, only one person tells stories in the Harry Potter universe, and that's me." And that's why there was never a Harry Potter role-playing game.
Interesting.
So yes, that's
it's
mean. A drunken evening. But,
it's mean, but I've seen such abominations perpetrated within licensed properties that if I were in the position in control of an IP such as she was, I would probably think the same.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, though, about that is that I think some people fundamentally don't understand role-playing games and their genesis in the playground. All kids tell stories in Harry Potter who like Harry Potter. Like, fan fiction is a thing, and fan fiction is a development of the games we played in primary school, where I was always Princess Leia because there was only one girl at my primary school, and that was me. Well, actually, there was 3 of us, but the other 2 went home for lunch, so they couldn't be Princess Leia. It was a very small school.
Yeah.
So your autobiography is called Princess Leia Doesn't Go Home for Lunch.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I love that.
Yes, I was going to jump, but yes, Harry Potter. It's part of the draw of Harry Potter is everyone wants the letter from Hogwarts. That's the
absolutely.
The whole thing.
I'm still heartbroken. Yeah.
I went through boarding school. I really don't want the letter from Hogwarts. So, but for most people, it's I want to be part of this world. You want to, discover that you have magical powers and all the rest of it, and that's the big draw. And Harry Potter is to some extent a Mary Sue. He's a character you can insert yourself in his place. He's not terribly interesting, and he's
devoid of character. Let's call it what it is.
He's devoid of character, and he's not the main driver. He's not the one who actually works stuff out and does the interesting stuff. He's just kind of there as a talisman. Anyway, we could digress.
We could digress, and we've actually only got 2 minutes left, so we can't afford such a digression. Although it is, have you ever seen those videos of Emma Watson when she's playing Hermione Granger and she's actually mouthing the lines of the other 2 characters, because Emma Watson is so Hermione Granger. We all know who's the true hero of Harry Potter.
Well, did you ever see that? I think it was a meme or something, but someone created their own book spines with, Hermione and that time that Harry Potter did this stupid thing. And there was a whole, she did it for this person did it for every volume in the series.
Oh, it's split in the comments. Ron, Neville.
Yes. All of them. Yeah, I mean, there are Harry Potter games and very similar games out there. And there was a LARP that was running in a castle in Poland for a while called the College of Wizardry or the School of Wizardry or something, which Warner Brothers went at one point, and they had to change a whole bunch of the terms they were using. Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to do, but there will never be, as I understand, there will never be an official Harry Potter role-playing game, unless J.K. Rowling suddenly needs an injection of cash for some reason.
Yeah, Infinite's accent, I couldn't agree more. A lot of TTRPG writers do a better job of world building. Don't get me started on the house system and how it perpetuates stereotyping and is no way to run a school. Anyway, on that note, it is now 8 o'clock. We have reached our allotted time. Thank you for joining us this week. Next week, it's just the Rooks, and we're talking about setting the scene, which is all about, she says, not having this in her notes, all the things that we do to bring character to a game, handouts, maps, etc., etc., etc. Thank you to Andy and Graham for joining me tonight. Thank you to our special guest, James Wallis. And of course,
absolute pleasure.
Thank you to everyone watching and our Patreons, without whom we could not have Inside the Rookery. Please do like, share, and subscribe on YouTube as always, and we will see you all next week for another episode of Inside the Rookery. See you all soon. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.